Right, it's 7 a.m. in the morning my time. Good morning from Finland. I'm one of the lucky ones this time in the sense that the time zones are not terrible. Lucas is in London. He's a little bit less lucky with 3 hours time difference. We have a pretty full agenda, and I think we want to have some discussion on a bunch of topics. So I want to get started with the usual overview. This is the quick working group at IETF109. If you participate here, there's a note well. The highlights here are mine. The text is the standard boilerplate. So there's a patent policy and the contributors agreement that you are, obliged to comply to when you participate in the IETF. And please read the BCP 79 for what it means to participate. Specifically, sending email to a list or speaking during one of these meetings is counted as participation. And then you're obliged to fulfill certain requirements with regards to disclosing IPR and so forth. You also agree to work respectfully with other participants. I hope I don't have to remind you of that. We haven't had issues in QUIC, and I hope we continue to not have any issues in this regard. We have scribes. Lucas mentioned that I think Dimitri and Robin volunteered. We're using the Coddy MD tool for that. As I said before, if you want to help them out by keeping an eye on the minutes and correcting things as you see them, please do so. Blue sheets, I guess Meetecho does this for us, Lucas? Not having done the training session? I don't know.
I may have done a training session or I may have not. But I believe due to the login requirements here.
Yes, the AD says yes. Okay, that's all I want to know. And chat, we have the Meetecho chat, which is, I think, also the Jabber chat room, and it's also now relayed with MNOT's funky proxy to our Slack channel called Jabber, so you can follow in many different ways. So we're using that. We're specifically also using that to monitor the microphone queue. So Lucas, how do you want to do this with the Q plus, Q minus?
No, I would prefer people use the Meetecho tool to put themselves in the queue. So there's a symbol that looks like a hand so that they can join the queue. And from the participant list, we can see people in the order. There's no accept participant. Like last time, it's slightly different. So if you're in the queue and we signal you to speak, then you can just use the send video and or send audio buttons along the top to begin speaking.
Thank you. Yeah, that's why I'm confused, because the queue stuff we do with WebEx or Zoom or whatever. But here we have custom tooling. Right. The agenda is here. I'm gonna, I didn't manage to make a slide out of it, but I'm gonna try and share my other browser view. Let's see if that works. And then you guys can follow along. Application window. That works. I should probably make it a bit bigger. Does that work for people? Too small, too big? Looks great. Okay. Right. So this is our agenda. I saw that there was a desire to bash the agenda by moving the quick multipath discussion down. I did that since a bunch of people spoke up in favor and nobody was really arguing against. If people want to rebash that, we can do that. I hope we don't have to. I think we can actually get through all of the presentations. We have 2 hours, and I'm hopeful that we'll get to multipath and have time for it at the end too. In the interest of saving time, hackathon interop report. Oh, I should say, is there anything else that people want to bash? Going once, going twice. Doesn't seem to be like it. Due to work, day job, and personal stuff last week, I wasn't actually able to join the virtual interop that we had during the hackathon. I've seen what's happening on the Slack, and the Google Sheet is being filled out. So I don't think there's anything special to report other than the interop is continuing. Also, the interop runner that Martin Seaman and Jana have set up is obviously continuously testing the implementation against each other. So that's ongoing and will keep on going for the foreseeable future. So I would move on to discussion of the base drafts. And I think Jana sent me slides for this. So I'll pull them up. I should say, oh yeah, congratulations. We are past working group. No, we're past IETF last call as of yesterday, I think. We got a whole bunch of directorate reviews. I can't remember if there were any individual issues that were raised that didn't come from working group participants, but there were certainly a bunch of those. So the project board at the moment with our issues looks rather full. Almost all of these, I think, are editorial and are being worked on by the editors, but there's a few that I think we're going to discuss today for the different drafts. Oops, wrong button. If I pull this up. Right. Whoever sent me these slides, it's your turn to speak now. Martin Thompson.
That would be Jana.
That would be me.
Jana.
Go ahead, Jana. Tell me about next slide when you're ready.
Yeah. Do you want to go full screen on this thing? Or are you leaving it as that is?
Not really, because I can't see anything.
Doesn't matter to me.
I can make it bigger.
It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter that much.
How's this?
So it's fine. I mean, right. I know what's on the slides. So, so very quickly, next slide. This shouldn't take very long to go through. Can you hear me, Ted? I don't know. It seems like my voice isn't coming through very clearly. I hope it is. If not, please say something on the Java chat. I'll speak even louder. See, so we had 129 issues filed during last call. And most of them were from area reviews. There were just a few from working group participants. We closed 74 of them as they were minor editorial or very clearly no action issues. We have left 55 issues open. Now that seems like a daunting number, but a lot of them are very, very trivial issues. 26 of them are proposal ready. Now these are ones that have had a lot of discussion on the issue itself and have proposals either of closing with no action or actually have PRs attached to them, and they've been marked as proposal ready for a little while now. So those are the issues that we have dealt with. Now, in the past 2 days, we've had a bunch of issues filed, specifically 25 issues. These are not proposal ready because they're still going through discussion. We'll get through them over the next few days, I expect. And there are 4 that are not yet proposal ready that are older than 2 days. Next slide. So of the open issues, there are exactly 2 issues that were marked as design. And these are both proposal ready, meaning that they have a proposal that's attached to them. And we believe that everybody's agreed that this is a reasonable way forward. I'm not going to go into the details of these issues. The numbers are there. You can go look them up. But we've had discussion on both of these, and those are ready to go. And as I said, there are 25 issues that were filed over the past 2 days. These are mostly area reviews, and INR review filed a bunch of issues. These are mostly straightforward. There's probably some discussion that will happen, but I suspect this is something that we can get through soon as well. Next. Finally, there are these 4 issues, which is actually 3 issues now because 43, 47 got closed. These were, so there are exactly 3 issues left that are older than 3 days and not yet marked, don't have a proposal that's completely done yet. And that's where we are. I don't know that we need to discuss these issues here. There is active discussion on GitHub. So I think that we will get towards closure on these unless somebody wants to say something here. But that's all I've got.
That makes sense to me. So if participants would like to discuss any of these in more detail, please get in the queue. There's Magnus and there's Martin in the queue.
Magnus, do you want to go ahead?
Yes. So I mean, first of all, thank you everyone who's been working hard on this and resolving issues, etc. And I think we've made great progress during this IETF last call. I think there's a few more, but it's. I was wondering about the. Could we spend a little bit more time to check some of these, which is. I think have impact, especially related to, for example, Diana version registry things, just to brief up where we are on those. I would appreciate it if it's possible. I know some of them are very late, but so
yeah,
okay.
I think we can. So I mean, the summary of the issue is that it was raised by Stuart in his Janard review that there's for the version numbers, there's actually there wasn't any registry defined, and it's certainly easy. To define one, the question is, or one question is, which document should they be defined in? Logically, you would expect them to be in the invariance document because version numbers are, invariant and have meaning across versions. However, there's a whole bunch of text around how what policies we define for our registries, and that text at the moment is in the transport draft. So there's some discussion on whether we should move that or replicate it, and I think that was what I remember the discussion being, but it's probably progressed since.
I don't think the discussion has moved too far past that point. I'd say that I didn't necessarily want to bring this up here because I feel like this is a discussion between the ADs and the chairs with some maybe input. I don't. And Lars, you can tell me if I'm off on this, but it seems to me that that's not a discussion we need to have with the entire working group, is it?
Daily disagrees with that. So the reason why, I mean, this is the registration rules you as people specifying future extension, etc., is going to live with. And I think it's actually is relevant. It's not just for the ADs. It's very much up to you. It's going to affect your working in the future. And what you and what you can't do. So I think you should pay. I mean, I think the work group should pay attention to this quite a lot, and not just say no, this is not something I care for. I mean, so. But maybe we'll let Martin. I think he has something to say on this.
Yeah, Martin's in the queue. Go ahead, Martin.
Yep.
Yeah. So I've written up a pull request for this one, and it's in the transport doc, and that's because that's a hell of a lot easier to do, and I don't think there's much additional value in going to the invariance doc. If you think of the transport doc as defining version 1 and the invariance doc as being a special bonus that doesn't have any real bearing on what people implement right now, then moving something to invariance with, let's say adding an extra 2 or 3 pages to that document isn't going to help those people who have to implement the transport. They have to go into 2 docs then to find everything that they need. They already have 3, so I guess it's not that much.
That aspect I'm fine with very much, but I think it's actually the other things about that's happening with IANA registry, which it might be more relevant, especially based on IANA review. So
I saw a number of comments there. None of them were particularly troubling from my perspective. There was a question of what notes to put in things. My preference would be to do nothing. And what were the other ones? I did have a small change that relates to the rules around the first value. I think I proposed that we go along the lines of what you did there. Can someone bring up that issue? I think that one is 4378 from memory.
I'll try.
Thanks, Lars. I mean, I can share my screen if you need.
What's the number, Martin?
4378. So Anna asked, well, what are the rules here? And I think we're a little bit unclear on this one, and Magnus suggested that the way to think about this is there are two ways you can approach adding a new value. You could either go for provisional assignment, or you could request early allocation. And I think early allocation applies only to those documents that have standards action or one of the heavier rule sets. And 7120 would apply in that case. So I've got a pull request there that basically says the first value in any space follows the standards action rule if you want it. But you can then go and follow the rules in RFC 7120 if you want it before you publish your document. And that's all that really says. I think that should address that, but I suspect people are going to have to review the text to satisfy themselves that that's the case.
Yeah, to be clear, this is an issue that was filed less than a day ago, and Martin's PR is from a few hours ago. So I do think I've not even had a chance to look at this. So
yeah, so I think I want to sort of encourage people that have an interest in this to take a look at the issue and state opinions there. It's not a technically hard issue. It's just a sort of what do we do in terms of that makes sense issue, and you know, we're going to settle it one way or the other, and I think we can basically do a bunch of different things, and none of them would be terrible.
Yeah. So there were
on the other issue.
Few issues that. Sorry, John. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Martin, that I wanted to support what you said on the other issue of having the version number registry descriptions in version 1. I think in the transport document rather than in variants. And the other reason that you didn't mention is that invariance is largely focused on protocol specific things. To the extent that we're talking about the process of assigning versions, I think that doesn't belong in the invariance document. But go on.
Yes, I was going to say, as part of the thing, I've done a review of all of the open issues, and aside from those that are on HTTP or QPAC, I'm satisfied now that we have reasonable coverage in terms of answers. Most of the questions that we got, I think, can be answered via email. But I've got pull requests up against a bunch of them. Magnus opened one, there was that one, and the issues that Jana had in his presentation all have pull requests aside from one, which is also HTTP.
Okay. So that's, I think, what we had in terms of issues discussion, unless somebody wants to bring up something else. Jana and Lucas are in the queue still.
I don't see Mike in the participants queue, so it's Mike Bishop. I just with respect to the HTTP issue that I raised, I think that probably is gonna, like, nothing will happen there. I think I'd be happy, but there's maybe a small editorial tweak that we might want to make. So I think there's not really much more to say there. I was hoping Mike would have had an opportunity to respond on the ticket, but he might be busy. So I've got little worry for that issue personally, given that I raised it. I think we can close it very quickly.
Great. So I think the intent is going forward. So IETF last call is closed. We have a bunch of issues. We just had a discussion on it. We're gonna do another revision of the draft set that rolls in all of the changes, and hopefully that leaves us with a clean slate. I think Magnus has talked to the ISG about taking the documents to ISG review sometime in December. And I think we're going to do it in 2 steps, taking invariance, transport, TLS, and recovery on one telechat, and taking the HTTP related ones, HTTP and QPAC, on a second telechat, just to make it a little bit easier for the ISG to review. So we'll take the revised draft after last call to the ISG. Question is what will happen then, right? In an ideal future, the ISG would approve them as is, and we would, then go forward into the RFC editor queue. But we might also need to do another round of revisions. We'll know when we'll know in December. But hopefully, in the new year, very soon, we can then basically have the draft in the RFC editor queue, and then they're being edited by somebody else for once towards production later in the spring, I hope, or later in Q1, since I don't want to be hemispherists here. I got asked by implementations that would like to ship a version that's called QUIC version 1, what they should do. And this is obviously what each implementation has to decide for themselves. My take is that once the drafts are in the RFC editor queue, meaning after ISG approval has happened, and after we have the version that got approved by the ISG and they're with the RFC editor, I would consider it safe to, and you're implementing that version, I would consider it safe to call yourself V1, because by definition, only editorial changes are supposed to happen as the RFC editor edits. And it would, something really unusual would need to happen for there to be any design changes between ISG approval and RFC. So that I think would be a safe thing to do for an implementation, but it's your call as an implementation what you want to do. If you want to wait until the RFC is out, for example. And there's 3 people in the queue.
Yeah, I was
David.
just about to say, David.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Cool. So I strongly disagree with what you just said, Lars.
Okay.
No, just fundamentally, I think we need bacon time here. We need to deploy this, and we need to know that it works. When we did this for TLS 1.3, we found out that the standard was broken. So luckily, work was done, it was diagnosed, and the standard was fixed before it shipped. And we really don't want to ship something that doesn't work on today's internet and all that. And similarly, I think like this can happen while the document is in the RFC editor queue to some extent, because if we do find something wrong, it won't probably be a big change, but it might still be a change. So I would strongly advise against anyone deploying the V1 identifier until we have it actually published, because that would cause a lot of these interop problems. So I would really prefer that we don't rush here. Our goal is to make a good standard. Our goal is not to have it published as soon as possible. The fact that it takes some time in the RFC editor queue and we have deployments, no one's waiting on this. There's no emergency here, right? So I would just urge us to be cautious and really get good deployment and good knowledge of the success of the protocol before we actually completely ship it.
Fair point. So I don't remember the timeline for TLS. I don't know if that issue was identified during RFC editor processing or earlier or later. I think we have people in the queue that can speak to that. One thing I want to point out, so this came from an implementation that has certain windows for making it into releases, right? And one of those windows is apparently first quarter next year. And the question for them is, can they make that window with version 1, or do they have to, wait for another window to come around? If you have an implementation that has sort of these timeline constraints, the question is, what do you do? And I gave that opinion. But if you don't have that, limitation, if you can roll out whenever, I think what you said makes perfect sense. Martin Thompson.
So I was going to say something else, but now I have 2 things to say. First thing is, I think David's being a little bit too cautious here. If it turns out that we have to burn the code point 1, then we can use another code point to identify the version that we publish in an RFC. That's totally fine. I know some people have even raised that as a possibility for version 1 anyways, picking a number like some random number out of the 32-bit space. So assuming that there is an emergency, we can pick another version number, and that's not going to be the end of the world. The one caution I wanted to add to your spiel was the salts will have to change between the last draft version and the final release version. I had hoped to do that pretty late in the process. I will do that if the ISG has changes to make, so that the version that goes into the queue has final salts. But if that doesn't happen and the ISG thinks this is fantastic and approves it without any changes involved, that might have to happen in Auth48, but we can probably just rev another version before it goes into the queue anyway, just to make sure that the final numbers are in place for those people who care about that.
We could do it with an RFC editor node also on the thing that goes into the queue, but we'll figure it out.
Right. Yep. We'll figure it out.
Ecker.
Yeah. So, hang on. So yeah. So first, I think you asked the question when the 1.3 interrupt problems were found. They were found prior to ISG review, but I think so. I think I have a position somewhere in between Martin and David. It's true that there's nothing special about the code point 1. However, the problem is that if we do not have perfect knowledge of when people are deploying with code point 1, and so what happens is that some substantial fraction of people deploy with code point 1, but it's cryptic, so we don't know, and then we have to make a change in last call, sorry, in the Auth48 that we think is nominal, and then so we make the change. We continue with code point 1 because we don't know there's people deploy code point 1. Now we have a cryptic interrupt problem that we find later, and so I think people should be strongly discouraged using code point 1 until until the RFC is actually shipped. There's no particular reason why they can't continue to use the 29 code point. And I imagine people will have support for that for a substantial period of time. It's not like it's a big change to change that code point later. It's also like it's a big change to remotely change it in many implementations. So I think yes, if we had perfect knowledge of what people are deploying, I think it would be fine for people to deploy code point 1 prior to RFC, but we do not, and so they should not.
Matt, would you like to go next?
Also, at least one horror story of a document in Auth48 discovering that there was a language ambiguity that then caused authors to realize that they in fact didn't understand each other. And the document hadn't converged when they thought it had. I think it's unlikely here, but they're allowing code out the door before the ink is dry is dangerous.
Come on.
Okay, Martin, I think.
Yeah, so I think Ecker interpreted my suggestion here as suggesting that we can revise. Matt, you're creating a little bit of noise there. Sorry. Thanks. So Ecker interpreted that as saying we can just revise the document to fix the problem. My suggestion was, yes, we can revise the document, but we'd also give it a new version number. So I was a little confused about what Ecker said.
Yeah. So I think what I was saying was that so right now, so if people deploy, so yes, if we're prepared to commit right now that any substantive change will not use version number 1, any substantive change made after the test time will not use version number 1, and this works. But if
yes.
Okay, but that's not a commitment we ever made, and it's not a normal commitment. So yeah, so I suppose one could do that, but I think this is just ill-advised. Like, people should wait. This is this is the reason we have things go to RFC.
Okay, Jana or Sean. You're on mute, Jana.
Oops, sorry. There I am. I want to remind, we are already deploying QUIC, just a different version of it right now. I mean, we are deploying H329. So V1 should just be another revision of QUIC. I don't think, I agree with Martin, I don't think that V1 is any special. not just because we can bend another version, but also because we have deployed QUIC. People are already doing it right now. And like I said, they're calling it H329. And when we ship V1, it's going to change to V1 from H329. It's not, unless we believe that the network is going to treat V1 special as against what we have deployed right now. I don't understand why version 1 needs to be treated any more specially than anything else we've done. We're going to have a change in salt. We're going to have something go on here. I still agree with what Lars said early on. There are people who are shipping version 1 now. Nick, I don't know if Nick Banks is here, but he was talking earlier about Windows they have deadlines, and their deadlines are not rolling. So they're trying to ship something early next year, and they are going to do that. There's also signaling where when we're talking to customers, for example, and they're asking if version 1 is ready. It doesn't make sense to wait for 3 months of RFC editor fixing the colons and the semicolons in the text before we call version 1 done. There just is no reason to wait for that.
Eka, have you got a response to that?
Not just colons and semicolons. Like, we made a lot of non-trivial changes to 1.3 and Auth48 because we actually read the document again with fresh eyes, and the RFC editor had questions. And none of those actually required, I don't think, like code changes, but it's not like I'm sorry, but if you go through, you have a 300-page set of document set, you're gonna have non-trivial changes in Auth48. You just are.
Okay, cool. Ian. Ian, are you there?
Yes, sorry. Need to unmute myself. I just want to say that we've deployed Draft 29 quite widely, both in Chrome as well as in Google services, and the performance seems quite good. So I don't have any overly large concerns about the technical aspects of the draft.
Okay, thank you. I see Spencer in the queue.
Yeah, and I would like to close the queues very soon. So after Spencer has spoken, and we're going to sort of close. So get in queue now if you have something to say on this. Thanks.
Go ahead, Spencer.
I thought there were people in line that had to be in front of me in the queue. We've actually had the conversation about not having a quick V2 anytime in the foreseeable future, but basically just using the extension mechanism a lot and not rolling new version numbers. So it seems like that's going to be an important part of this answer also. I agree that we've always talked about, the version numbers shouldn't be special. You just need to support them. But if that's a helpful observation, we've talked about that a lot in the past.
Thanks, Spencer. I don't see anybody on the queue on this. So let's move on. We're pretty much right on time to open issues on QUIC-LB, which is another one of our adopted working group items. So I should say that also we're going to try, Lucas and I are going to try and focus at least part of the group mindset now a little bit on our other work items like this one and like ops drafts that we're also supposed to finish at some point soon. So expect to see some nudges on making progress on those drafts. And we're going to probably have a chat with the editors of those drafts on how we're going to use it. We had this late stage process for the base drafts, and it's a question mark whether that makes sense to replicate for these drafts or not. So that'll be a chat that we're going to have with the editors at some point in the next few weeks. Martin.
Good day, everyone. Next slide. so there's I presented actually a very similar slide deck at 108. I got some feedback on some useful things there, so we did get rid of one of the 4 algorithms, which was actually quite gratifying to delete. And there's been some other rework. In terms of contribution, so there's 5 open issues right now. Martin Thompson and Christian, thank you. You've actually provided a lot of great feedback on the draft, and we fixed up a lot of things. Also, I've gotten some comments on GitHub from some people at Ant Financial, and they've had some interesting discussions, and we've cleaned up some editorial issues. The other thing that has happened is I was able to open source some implementations. There's a library that will encode and decode CIDs for you. That's the first item there. And then I've hacked Nginx to be a load balancer in the QUIC-LB sense. And that's the other GitHub. Yes, I know it's weird. There's 2 different projects. It's legal stuff in my company. So that's available. I'm actually waiting on a server implementation to exist out there. And then when someone has one, we can interop. So please let me know on Slack when you have that. Next slide. Okay, so some other things that have happened since 108. I did, as I mentioned, Ant Financial has some discussion of retry service, and we've addressed those critiques. They also requested a UDP proxy protocol. I think probably many of you are familiar with the TCP version of proxy protocol. I thought that was out of scope for this particular draft. It's more of a NAT thing, in my view. And in fact, there's a NAT draft later in the agenda. But if people really want to see that, then please say something. I went to the ops area to try to get some reviews, and they didn't really claim to have the right people to provide feedback on this. So we were still actually not doing particularly well on getting feedback from layer 4 load balancer operators, particularly the big cloud providers. I mean, Azure's maybe an exception. But even then, they've been really reluctant to engage in anything beyond the plain text algorithm. And today, there's still 5 open issues. Several of them have PRs. And there hasn't been a lot of feedback on some of them. And I'm kind of getting to the point where I'm just going to make a decision, but I'm going to make one last appeal for some guidance here. Next slide. Okay. So the first 2 bits of every connection ID are what we call config rotation. So one of them is left for 4-tuple routing, which is a different thing. But essentially, if you're rolling out a new, say you're rotating your keys, then it'll take a while for all your servers to get those keys and switch from one form of CID to the other. So for a while, you can switch based off these config rotation bits to be operating 2 algorithms or configurations at once. There's a proposal to make it 3. And the reason for that is actually if you have SNI switching. Next slide. And this maybe explains the problem a little better. So I presented this slide last time too, but like a really dumb thing to do if you were Mega Cloud Corp who is operating these load balancers, have a single global config where everybody had, just there's one giant server mapping for everybody, because then all the customers create each other server mappings, and all you need to do as an attacker is become a customer of Mega Cloud Corp, and you have the config, and you can decode CIDs everywhere. So that would be bad. Next slide. So, in practice, you're going to want to run different configs for different customers that are mutually mistrustful of each other. And, you can have different load balancer instances, different, virtual IPs and ports, or you could do something like the SNI. Now, if you have load balancer instances, IPs and ports, then there's no problem here. You can have different configs running on those different discriminators. But if it's something that's in the client hello, and you're operating and you're trying not to route off the 4-tuple because the whole point of this is to be robust to migration, then you're going to need something that's in every packet. And there are basically just 2 options. One is to have multiple configs separated by these config rotation bits, which does solve the problem of having the mutually mistrustful customers being able to read each other's servers mappings. However, it also means that SNI is essentially globally visible, right? You can connect to the service. You could connect to a certain SNI, see what the config rotation bits, and then understand those correspond, which circumvents things like echo. The alternative is just make them share a config, and then if you happen to be cohabited with this other customer, then there's some limited exposure there where they can read your server mapping. But it'd probably be hard for an attacker to deliberately position themselves there. So there's a trade-off there. I'm kind of leaning towards the second one. Actually, I'll say I'll strongly lean towards the second one for some of the reasons I just described. If people have a real problem with that, then this is a good time to bring that up. Next slide. Next slide. So the other item is we are technically in violation of quick transport because we're supposed to have really zero open correlation between connection IDs, and that's not strictly true. The plain text connection ID by definition has the server ID in the clear. And so I'm sensing a lot of momentum to keep this in the draft. And so one possibility here to solve this problem is, or not solve this problem, but mitigate this problem, is to introduce a transport parameter that where a server will basically tell the client, since the server is making a decision for its own convenience, that actually has the privacy impact on the client. Just having a transport parameter saying, hey, I'm doing this, and if you're super duper concerned about linkability, maybe don't migrate, maybe solves at least addresses the problem sufficiently to move forward. Next slide.
You have Ian in the queue.
Yeah, Ian, go ahead.
I just had a really quick comment, which is that, anytime you have like one domain name mapped to one like IP, you have immediate linkability. So like there's an extreme in which you're just not going to attain like the guarantees we would actually like. So I don't know. I don't know what to do about that, but I just want to call that out and say like the world is not perfect. This is kind of best effort.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one lesson from thinking about this quick OP stuff for a long time is that there's no guarantees in this space. But on the other hand, like Echo exists for a reason, and largely it's concealed the SNI. So clearly there are use cases, and it would be a shame to kind of break those with something like this. Martin?
Yeah, so there's two things here. This is the same server that we're talking to, which I think to Ian's point, if the server only has one, if there's only one server at this IP address, then you know it's this server. But the text here is specific to connections, and I don't think you're violating that requirement so directly. It's just that you're creating smaller anonymity sets for those customers. So if you think about using the plaintext server ID, that is analogous to having a single IP for each one of those servers that's sitting in the back end. And at that point, yeah, you're back to as bad as what Ian described, which is, depends on how many people are using that server as to whether or not you have any real anonymity. But in most cases, you'll get some.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear that you're comfortable with that, because I am. Do you think that the transport parameter is worth having?
No, I think it's probably not worth doing something like that. I suspect that well, I guess we'll find out in time, but I wouldn't start with something like that. It doesn't sound like I don't know what I would do with that information.
Okay, there's a PR on the GitHub. If you want to put in comments on that PR that has a TP in it, then please do. Ian?
I'm just agreeing with MT, saying that I don't think it's worth having a transport param. We commonly have like 10,000 or more connections going to a single machine. So like, I mean, that's sufficiently anonymous, I think, for the purposes of our conversation.
Okay. Next slide. Next slide. Just click through all this stuff. Next slide. We already talked about this. Okay, that's it. Any other questions, comments? Oh, I'm sorry. No, there's another issue there. Bear, go ahead.
There's two more slides.
Yes, I forgot. But yeah, go ahead, Eric.
It's a more general comment. Keep going.
Okay, so this has actually been resolved recently. Christian gave me a PR that we're talking through. So next slide. I think we're done, but let's see what the next one is. No, that's it. Okay. Oh yeah, actually there was one point here. So like there's nothing there's a list of the things that you need to configure to make this work, but there's no configuration mechanism. And I've really not been able to get any feedback from anyone on like what would be a useful thing to do. If anyone has any ideas here, like I would very much appreciate a PR. I think we can move forward without it, but it would make the draft better. That was my last request. And that's it. I think I really am done now. Eric.
We were chatting with some of our CDN folks and some of the other people who do some of our core network operations and stuff about, you know, hey, there's this quick thing, and could we maybe like make that work, please? And they'd been involved in some of the very early renditions of some of the LB stuff, and we said, hey, can you take another look and see? And they were very much happier with some of the later things. So I wanted to say thank you for putting so much time and effort into this. I know it hasn't had as much discussion as a lot of the other things, but we've at least got a bunch of folks who are reading it closely and care a lot about what's going on.
Cool. I expect to wrap up the remaining issues shortly after this meeting. And so, you know, hopefully, I mean, I don't really see any other obstacles to working group last call unless people start reading it and coming up with more issues. Thanks.
Thanks, Martin. Next up, we have the ops drafts, and there's no slides, but I was told to pull up this page. Brian, Mirya, go ahead.
Good morning, afternoon, evening. So yeah, actually, if you just go to the issues tab, that's mainly what I want to show here is we have 3 issues. One of which I was able to do a PR for during the where we use version 1 as version 1 discussion. One of which I think does require a little bit of discussion, so whether we want to have normative language or not, and one of which has a little bit of text to add. We've had some discussion on this document sort of in hallways. We've had some discussion on the mailing list. We've had somewhat more discussion in the issues. We are getting more participation from people we were in the working group than this time last year. Thank you very much. That's good. Basically, I'm here to say the train is leaving the station. We would intend, once these 3 are fixed and have PRs merged for them, to submit another rev of the doc and have that go to working group last call then. So if you have anything that you desperately want to say or ask about these documents right now is your 5-minute chance to do so in this meeting. Otherwise, we would intend to send revisions to these documents that are ready for working group last call before the next IETF.
Yeah, and I actually think we actually did address 115. We probably just didn't close it, but like Martin,
okay.
if you want to have another look, it will be fine as well.
Yeah, so we'll you know, I'm in the background here sort of clearing these issues up. So it could even be by the end of this week we have documents that we think are ready to rev. We'll just submit new versions, and then we can discuss on the list whether we want to go to working group last call on them.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So we certainly want to like have people take a broader look at these, and I think going to working group last call is an excellent way to make that happen. And they've been hanging around for a long time, and not given that the base drafts are now stable, these ones can certainly stabilize too, and then we can hopefully ship them soon. So I would agree with that.
Right. So if you look at like issue 100, one of the reasons these have been sitting around for a long time is we're waiting for the base drafts to stabilize, because we're actually sort of like doing editorial things into those drafts, right? Like just like making sure the section numbers line up and stuff like that was one that we were holding on to. But yeah, so I think we're ready to go. And thank you very much to everyone who has since the last time. Oh, just lost lights. That's neat. Since the last
because
time.
Apparently I started a poll. That's why you lost the lights.
Since the last time we came up here and did the, please look at these documents, we have had more people looking at the documents. So thank you very much to everyone who's contributed in the meantime.
Yeah, so I did a show of hands thingy. So if you switch to that tab, because I would like to know sort of who read a version of these drafts like during this year. So if you could sort of raise your hand or not raise your hand actively, that would at least give us sort of an initial feeling of, how much review have these recently gotten in the working group. And that might inform, how long the working group last call should be and so on. Plus, I want to use this tool for something. And I noticed it has auto capitalization because I did not shout that question when I typed it. But
well, usually we're in a room with really crappy acoustics. So I think it's shouting this is actually appropriate.
Yeah. It also, the font size also means that you have a certain limit of how long the question can be, which I guess is a feature. Right, so I'm going to end the session in about 3 seconds, and then we'll see where we are. Going once, and we're done. So we have 16 people who said they read a version out of 128 participants, which is not great, and 28 actively said they didn't. So I guess that argues for a longer working group last call, maybe do 2 or 3 weeks or something like that to really get people to take another look. A pro tip: you don't have to wait for that working group last call to read these documents. You can read them now and send feedback already. Right? There's no need to hold back if you have some time. Anything more on the ops drafts?
Nope.
Yeah, I would like to comment very quickly. So I think we've been reading the other documents and been trying to flag anything that needs to be mentioned in those drafts. But if people have more stuff, that's something to look for. It's not only reading the drafts and figuring out if you agree or disagree with anything that's in there, but also figuring out if there's anything that needs to be added.
And I would say there might also be things that might need to be taken away. We've tried to take things that were initially mentioned, I think especially in the applicability draft, that have now made it into the base drafts, right? So things that we originally didn't think were going to make it into the base drafts. We've cut a few of those over the time that we've been editing these documents. But if there are any more that, in other people's opinion, that we were missing, that would also be good input.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. And that brings us in the bashed agenda brings us to the other issues, aka if time permits section, where we have 4 presentations that are going to be quite quick with a quite quick discussion at the end. Neither of these are at the moment working group items. And we're going to then hopefully be able to do this in let's say half an hour or so, or maybe 40 minutes, and then have a chunk of time at the end for multipath. First one of these is version aliasing. Go ahead, Martin.
Yeah, hello again, everyone. So the purpose of this draft is to improve both the greasing and the privacy properties of QUIC, and this is basically taking a quite old Martin Seaman PR and dialing it up to 11. Next slide. So the basic idea is this: so you connect to the version 1, and in that handshake, you deliver the server delivers a transport parameter that has a bunch of essentially random numbers. There's a version number, an initial token extension, which is something that's just tacked on to the token, and then there's a salt, and there's a packet length offset, which is an integer that's applied to packet lengths later on. And so the salt and the offset are actually computed via some secure hash from the version number in ITE. And so the idea is that, next slide, the client takes all that data, uses in its subsequent connection, it uses the random version number. It appends that token extension to whatever other token it might have in initial, or it could just have that. If it doesn't have a token, you just put that in the token field, and then it adds the length offset to the packet length. And now the server gets that, and from the token extension and the version, it is able to compute the salt again, as well as the offset. And then so that salt is what's used to encrypt the initial packet. In fact, all the initial packets. So now, for connections after the first, the initial packets are encrypted with keys that are not accessible to anyone who happens to be observing. Next slide. So this obviously greases a bunch of stuff. So currently we have variable values for most of the fields of the initial, but a lot of them are not unreadable. And we've covered a lot of things that aren't. This draft basically makes almost everything else unreadable that is supposed to be, and greases most of what's left. Of course, there's a different draft to handle the quick bit, which I didn't touch that. Packet type is possible, but that has some issues, and I did include it in the draft. Next slide. So I'm going to make a lot of claims about this design. I'm not going to read them all, but sort of the highlights. So among good things, I'll contend that the initial packet is entirely private, immune from ossification. You can't ossify TLS stuff if it's running over quick. So we could even use the version field again. It greases things that haven't been greased before. It deals with a lot of initial injection attacks, etc. However, it does not cover the first connection, which is a serious problem. It does depend on the version negotiation draft, which I think is going to move forward. And most of all, like, this is something that I think a lot of people have incentive to drop. And if no economically important browsers and websites are interested in this, then it's really not worth moving forward on. In terms of moving forward, I think it's certainly possible to maybe steal some stuff from Echo to do something about the first connection before I really invest time in that, or just running Echo itself, I suppose. But before investing a lot of time in that, I just wanted to find out if there was any real interest in continuing to develop this idea. Next slide. So there's on the GitHub, Christian. You are muted. Still muted.
Still muted, Christian.
Am I good now?
Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, I did not realize that I had to click audio and video. I'm just dumb and old and lazy. But it's very interesting to find something that makes the connection more robust. I wonder that if we do want to make the connection more robust, whether we should actually change the encryption or add an additional checksum to verify that the things are not messed in transit. I mean, there's a big step in robustness between preventing third party to mess with the packets and making the packet not observable by anybody, because make not observable by anybody may well be a bridge too far. So to summarize, I'd be interested to look at something along those lines, but something that goes for authentication of the packet rather than encryption.
Yes, I know you have something in this space, Christian. There's a separate draft that you and Kazuo did, which was an influence. So thanks for that. All right, yeah. So I think I'm trying to dial this up to really this sort of a maximum result. I think some people in the chat are saying, well, this is really about the greasing, not about the security and the privacy. And if that's the attitude, I think we can go something closer to Martin Siemens' original proposal, which is just for a server to have 2 or 3 versions and different salts that it just gives to everybody. That's a direction we could take this if people are interested in implementing that grease.
Yeah, so
Any
I think
other comments?
It'd be interesting to hear some comments on what direction people think work in this space should take, if any, right? Should it go towards greasing? Should it go towards what Christian outlined? Should we not do anything in this space? So maybe some quick feedback would be useful, I guess, for Martin to determine if he wants to spend more time on this. David. Go ahead, David.
Cool. I think this is great. I think this is useful and is going to help, make a slight dent in ossification risk, and also has slight privacy improvements. I think you're maybe overselling the properties we get, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do this. That just means that we need to actually do the security analysis. So I'm supportive of the working group spending time on this. Maybe, after we time permitting, given the main drafts and the 3 currently adopted extensions, but I think this is good, and I would like for Google to implement this. I think this is useful.
So, David, for clarification, you think increased greasing is what you are interested in seeing?
So I'm interested in the objectives that I see this accomplishing is making ossification harder as the first one. As the second one is improving privacy because it makes observability slightly more limited.
Thank you. Ekar. Ekar, go ahead.
Trying to find the buttons. So, I think the question to ask here. As usual, I would sort of start with the threat model and what exactly we're trying to do. You've heard me say that before, so that's not any surprise. I think the question is is this by the time you bar to do this, this is sort of half VCH, and so the question is, should you just accept and do ECH? Quick ECH, as I think Kazuho and Christian proposed, right? So I think that would be. The difference, as far as I can tell, is that this is the primary difference in this and ECH is that it only works in the second connection. So I guess taking a step back, we looked at basically this design for ECH for subsequent connections. We're using the what I want to say, the PSK mechanism as basically the seed, and then the idea would be you bet a PSK, and then you come back, and then you would never then you wouldn't have to have the SNI. And the problem with that, obviously, is the same problem you have here, which is that if you lose state, then you got to have some way to recover. And so the way you recover is basically by being oh, I detected that if you lose state, you recover with a VN, and then you start leaking, and then you leak the state on the wire, and an ECH you need a mechanism where you don't need to stay on the wire. So I guess the question is, could we have a public key-based mechanism which would not involve the keys that you can stay on the wire, and then also allow priming in the DNS? Would that be dramatically more complicated than this? I think that's the thing I would try to take a look at.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ekar. So yeah, I'm starting to noodle a little bit on how to bring in some ECH concepts to this. Those aren't ready for prime time right now by any means. I will say it does do some things differently than ECH. It does have some different properties, like the server generated initial packet is entirely protected as well. For instance. Now, whether or not you care about that is another question.
Well, no, right. I think the put would be. I think the idea would be you would hoist that you would. I think if I remember correctly, Kazuho and Christian's proposal basically had the ECH, but also hoisted some of that information into QUIC, so you could encipher the initial as well as just deciphering the TLS payloads. So I think the question would be, can you do that, right? I don't know. I haven't. I read the proposal, but it's been a while, so I don't have that load back into cache. But I guess all I'm saying is this is a reasonably complicated proposal already, and so the more we can not have to solve these problems twice, the better. And also, I think one of the real lessons of ECH is how difficult it's been to characterize the security and privacy properties of the system, and the more and these are very intermediate properties, are even harder, maybe harder to characterize. But again, I don't know. So I guess if the question is, are we interested in looking at this? Yeah, I think I'm with David. Let's take a look, but let maybe open the aperture a little bit and see what the options are.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Kinnear.
Yeah, I would second David's comment in the sense that I would be very interested in greasing a bunch of this stuff, and I think it's worth spending some time to see if we can get some meaningful security and privacy wins. But at the very least, let's grease it so that even if it takes us a whole nother version to deliver some security and privacy wins, it'd be real cool if we could actually use that version.
I got Crystal and
Christian?
Kazuo in the queue, and I want to cut the queue after Kazuo, and please be quick.
Just a comment on what Eric said about reusing ECH and generally reusing anything from TLS. I am very worried that if for some reason the TLS message grow in size to be larger than one packet, then the TLS solution will not be adequate. So I think we have to take that into consideration. Is it robust to an increase in size of the TLS packets?
Let's take that to the list as a discussion. Kazuo, please. Or Kazuo just dropped from the queue.
Okay, well, thanks for everyone. So I'm getting the cautious enthusiasm I was hoping for, so I will continue to progress this draft as best I can. Please read it, comment on the GitHub, etc. Okay, so the other draft I have is somewhat less exciting. This came out of a conversation in TSVWG about NATs and QUIC. Next slide. Yeah, and this is what it's saying. Like a NAT designer might look at the connection and say, oh, I could do neat things with this, but in fact, that's just going to like break protocol mechanisms. The next slide. So this is one example. Like you could try to multiplex on a port by distinguishing from the CIDs, but of course, if there's a mobility event, then that's going to create a black hole, which is worse than rejecting the connection in the first place. Next slide. And then on the other side, on a server NAT, you can attempt to conceal address changes to allow a routing infrastructure a 4-tuple-based routing infrastructure to work without modification, but then you essentially erase the signal of the mobility event that triggers all the path verification stuff. So you've basically broken the security model of QUIC. So basically, it's just a very short draft that says don't do that stuff. Next slide. And as I mentioned in my other talk, like somebody asked about Proxy Protocol. I know that I saw that Cloudflare done something in this area and written something down. It would seem to fit in a NAT type draft if people wanted it. I'm not super energized to see this text added, but if people are, we can look at it. Next slide. So I honestly don't care how we triage this information. It's currently an individual draft, obviously. We could toss it into the ops draft. We could just have a reference to this expired draft in the ops draft and not have all this verbiage polluted. We don't have to pollute the ops draft with all this verbiage. It could be an info RFC. I could do it here. I could do it in TSVWG, or we could just drop it all together if people think this is stupid and pointless. So I'm welcome to have hear your input on that.
Thanks. Please get in the queue. I would say that if we decide that text along these lines is needed, I would have a preference for seeing it in the ops draft simply because this seems like something that is a good target for, but it's a question of how much text are we talking about, and that's a different discussion. But comments from the group, please.
Or perhaps everyone's indifference is as great as mine.
Gori, go ahead.
When we talked about it in TSVWG, one of the good things about having a separate draft might be that somebody who was looking to implement a NAT found it with the other RFCs about how to do NAT, and then they read it, and then they thought, let's not do this. So that was the only thing that was discussed in TSVWG, which said this might be worth publishing. Something to think about.
Yeah,
I don't have a strong preference myself.
Fair point. I would point out that people who build NATs don't really seem to look at RFCs very much. So from that perspective, it doesn't quite matter where we stick it. But yeah, maybe it's a minor point. Thanks. Anybody else? All right, then I will try and pull up.
Miria?
Oh, there's more. Okay, let's cut the queue after Spencer and go ahead.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to reference an expired draft from ops, so I'd rather merge it or have a separate document published as RFC.
Do you not want to bring the 4 or 5 pages of verbiage into ops?
I mean, I think we can easily have a shorter word in the body and then add some more text in the appendix or whatever. I didn't look at it in detail, but I think we can also merge the whole thing into ops, because if that's, you know, where people look for it, then that's fine. Like, or a separate RC is also fine. I don't know.
Okay. Spencer?
So back to Laura's thing about people who build NATs don't read RFCs. I think one of the hopes that we had was that people who buy NATs might. And so putting that, you know, if you're going to have a chance at that, putting it in the ops draft might be the best chance of that happening.
Okay, Martin, I hope you got some feedback.
Yeah, I think the predominance of the, I think what people would like the first step to be for me to send a PR, so I'll send a PR.
All right,
thanks.
There's Gory and Spencer still in the queue, who I assume are leftovers. So I'm going to drop you guys. Next up, I think it's Nicholas, but I don't know who's giving this talk. Nicholas is at least getting ready to speak.
I'm ready. But Gory is here, so you can give the talk as well.
I don't know, the audio is quite bad for you.
Can you hear me?
Poorly. Can you go closer to the mic?
Yes, I can. Is it better now?
It is better.
I don't show the video because I have a very poor upload. So
that's fine. Go ahead and tell me when to progress the slides.
Okay. Are you sharing them now? Oh, I don't see.
Yes.
Okay, I don't see that on the screen, on Miteco screen. So, okay, so second slide, please. So this is conjoint work with Emile from Orange, Gory, and Tom Jones from Aberdeen. So the idea in a nutshell is to basically remembering and exchanging additional parameters when reconnecting with ZeroRTT. These parameters could be bandwidth estimations based on using in-flight data or the RTT estimations. Why we want or think this idea would be useful would be, for example, sharing favored estimation of the path parameters so that client could adapt their request, or also this could be useful to improve the ramp up with ZeroRTT servers. There are different implementations as far as we know. There's ours in PicoQuick using TLS 1.3, and there is Matt Joras ones using BTP token, as he mentioned in the emails. We think that the short-term objective should be to merge the IDs and have views on what the group think of this proposal. Next slide, please. So, as I cannot see the screens, I guess we are now on the expected benefits. So we have implemented this version 7 of the draft on PicoQuick. There is a pull request, and here you can find the link to it. We have evaluated it over the different quick for fat scenarios. Here I showed just quickly some results on the case where we have 50 megabits download and 10 megabits upload and an RTT of more than 600 milliseconds. We use Cubic as a congestion control, and how the congestion control reacts to the ZeroRTT BDP information. It just jumped to the previously measured capacity. This is really not what we recommend. It is just that it was an easy way to implement as a first step, and also this could let us see somehow what is the best we could achieve. This is just a 2 megabyte transfer, and I show here the results of the median value for this 2 megabytes transfer. So without any ZeroRTT connection, so it takes more than 4 seconds to download the file. It takes almost 3.5 seconds with the ZeroRTT enabled, and when you enable ZeroRTT and the BDP extension, you save some 500 milliseconds more. These 500 milliseconds may not look much for you, but for satellite guys, it's very important. So I guess the next slide is more for discussions on how do we implement that? There have been some discussions on the list on whether using specific BDP tokens or new token. Do you have any views on that?
You have Matt and Christian in the queue, so let's go to them now. Matt,
Yes.
go ahead.
Yeah, so just some context. We're developing something that a server informs a client, about its current bandwidth estimate and like other network characteristics. And the way that we're doing this is with a quick frame. And there's a lot of similarities. For our infrastructure, it makes more sense for the server to, kind of actively keep track of this stuff and remember it. But so it would be nice if like we could do something like this with the same sort of frame. So like I think it's compatible. If we have a frame that can convey this sort of commonly useful information, and you send that as part of 0RTT, then it can go in the other direction too. So you could have a client that remembers, this sort of thing and sends it, and then the server consumes it rather than the other way around. But I've just been a proponent of frames for this sort of thing because I think frames are really easy to add and they're really easy to extend, and we can make them more useful than just having like a single number.
Christian.
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion already about this proposal, and there are two trends that have emerged. One is what Matt said, is that there is a bunch of things that come from the idea of informing the peer about the status of the connection. That can be done with a quick frame. And there's another part which is about remembering what a peer did before. And I think the remembering part, the consensus that we have is that it probably did not be standardized because it's very specific to an implementation. And implementation can, if they can remember that locally by having some kind of cache, obviously. They can also use the same kind of stuff we do with tokens to remember that. And if they do that with token, they probably want to do that not with the TLS token, but rather with the new token, because the new token is much a better fit in the sense that it can be sent at any time in the connection without messing with the TLS state machine. That's
So Kazuo is agreeing with Christian in the chat. He dropped out of the queue. So Ian is next. Ian, go ahead.
I also agree with Christian, but specifically, I would say that.
Could you speak up a bit, Ian? You're pretty soft.
Yeah, sorry, my mic setup is not amazing. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, I actually think this is potentially fairly dangerous because, like, you're sending something to the client's going to send back without any authentication and potentially open a much larger contention window or other information. I think doing it in the new token frame is relatively safe. I mean, relatively. There's some guidelines. I think that's a TSV area sort of like gig to figure out what the guidelines are. But I don't see why we need to do anything in QUIC for this. I think this is my big objection. Like, if you want to do this, we actually provide pretty good mechanisms in QUIC to accomplish this mechanism. And I think new token is a great example. And I think providing something explicitly in QUIC is probably more dangerous than it's worth. It's basically a token. So I would really want to understand why this needs to be like work in the QUIC working group.
There's a whole bunch of agreement in the chat for me. Jana's in the queue, and I'm going to cut the queue after you, Jana. Go ahead.
I want to echo what Ian said, but also ask the question of why does this need to be explicit? If this is ultimately going to get echoed back to the server, new token gives us the mechanism to make this completely opaque to the client. Is there a reason to make this visible and available to the client?
Nicholas, I think that's a question for you.
Can you I didn't understand the last part of the question.
My question is there a reason to make this visible to the client, in the sense that if the server is the one that's exporting this value and then is going to receive it back, you could keep this completely opaque. That's what you get for putting it in the new token. The new token, a server can do that already. Why do we need another mechanism for doing exactly that?
There were some discussions on the list on the fact that clients could adapt whatever they request depending on the estimations they received from the server. And there could be also some limited clients that would adapt their sizing buffers depending on what they have.
All right. We're running low on time for this presentation. Okay. Nicholas, is there a point? Is there anything in your next 2 slides that you still want to show? Or did you get the feedback you were looking for?
I guess I just wanted to go to the last one, saying that I understand that the next steps may not be the ones we envisioned before having this discussion. So I guess that with the others, we'll have a discussion based on what we received from.
Nicholas, I at least just lost audio. I don't know, but others.
I lost audio too.
I think he just got disconnected.
Mic drop.
Yeah. All right. Moving on to the last one we have in this section of the agenda. It's the QLOG drafts. And Robin should get ready to speak once I find the right button here.
I assume I'm audible.
There you go. You're audible. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's great. All right. So what to do with QLOG? Next slide, please. For those who don't know, QLOG, it's a way for endpoints themselves to, in a structured, standardized way, to log whatever protocol events are happening. This is useful for debugging and analysis. You might want to use things like packet captures for that, but this approach has some benefits over that. Firstly, you can log things that are not reflected on the wire, like congestion windows. It's also more interesting for privacy because you don't need to decrypt the entire packet capture. You can only log the things that you actually care about, excluding user data. And finally, having this in a structured format rather than like a free-form logging, what most people did, is that it's very easy to build tooling on this and also to do automated analysis. Next slide. So QLOG has luckily been adopted by a lot of you over the past 2 years. Most notably, Facebook has been deploying this into production, proving that it can scale, that it can work in practice. I also find it interesting that the implementations that don't use QLOG use something very, very similar in concept. So the general concept is solid, I think. Over time, we've had a lot of feedback on this from the working group, so thank you all for that. But still, next slide. This is still just a personal draft from me, and we have relatively few people dealing with the day-to-day work on these things. And we've just released a draft 02 of this. With most of the things we could reach consensus on our own. But we think it's time for some additional discussion and to see how to progress QLOG in the future. The main question is who is going to do that discussion and where is it going to be done? Next slide. So we can see a few options for that. The first one is, of course, the worst case. Just let us continue and do whatever we think is best. The second one could be something, I think, more informal within this working group, just people that are interested doing some interims or a low-key design team to just go out to figure out the main things. We could also move to actually adopt this for some post V1 work, or the final option is to move this to a different working group, or even to maybe do a BOF and try to see if we can make a separate working group of this. I think in the future we would go to option 4 anyway, since this general concept is useful for more than just QUIC and H3. It's something I believe in, and something many others also believe and also are working on already. We knew this from the beginning when we started presenting this type of stuff in TSV area, but back then it was just that it would take too long to do something generic from the start, which I think was the correct move. So we decided to do something in QUIC and H3 first to get some experience. I think we have that experience now, and so it might make sense to move this along, try to do something similar with it. But I wanted to bring it to the QUIC working group first, because this is, of course, where a lot of the investment has happened, and some people might still want to use this after the initial debugging phase. So that's mainly the question: who is interested in continuing work on this, and where should it be done? Thanks.
Thanks, Robin. So while people get in the queue to give you feedback, I would say that while it's true that you try to make QLOC a general thing, I think the use case at the moment, or the main use case, is still very much focused on QUIC, and specifically for like TCP-based workloads, right? Existing tools exist, and people have instrumentation for that seems to work well enough. But for QUIC, it certainly fills a need, as can be seen by the adoption and partially by the deployment that it's seen, right? So I think personally, I think it's shooting too far. I would think 3 is reasonable if we see enough interest from within the QUIC group. And it doesn't preclude doing 4 at some future point, but I think at the moment the sweet spot seems to be what QLOC does for QUIC. And so I think that is what I would like to discuss here, mostly. But the queue is filled, so I'll shut up and let Martin Duke speak.
This I think, well, of course you have 2 drafts. I would definitely like to see the QUIC QLOG draft adopted in this working group. I would strongly support that, because I think it's ubiquitous enough in these implementations that, and it's like it is the default, the general tool set for this. So I think that would be good. As for where the where like kind of the core QLOG architecture draft should go, sort of conceptually, it's probably not the right place for it, but in practice, as Lars said, all the QLOG people are here. So like, why not do? I mean, I would just as soon do it here. Yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Go ahead, Eric.
So I think QLOG is great. We've adopted it. I think there's a really nice privacy win to not having to export the keys for all of the content that you're sending, in a way that for a connection going over TLS, we can just drop the headers in a PCAP and be done. I think being able to visualize more than what you just get from a bunch of TCP headers is actually really nice. Especially as we can expand that into H3 and looking at some of the prioritization schemes and that sort of thing. I think that's been both useful in debugging problems, but also useful in helping people conceptualize the impacts of the changes we're making in the specs. So I think it's both useful for the working group doing the working group and for the implementations actually deploying things. So I'd love to see more of those. I think I'd actually slightly disagree with Lars in that I would be interested in bringing some of this to TCP. I think, yes, there are tools. I think what we've got right now in QLOG is almost as good as most of those tools. And so if we can put all those in one place, we currently, have the ability to dump a bunch of packets for TCP stuff, being able to dump a bunch of QLOG for QUIC. It's very quickly becoming apparent that you look at the QUIC stuff and you're like, wow, this is cool, and I can see exactly what's going on. And you look at the TCP stuff and you look at it with this one view and you see one piece of what's going on, and then you go off to some totally different tool and you run it through there and you get a slightly different view of what's going on. So I think there is value in having all of that in one place, and being able to put our energies into making that really robust rather than each tool having to reinvent all of that.
Yeah. if I could just interject a little bit, it's not so much expanding it to TCP, although that's definitely something we've been doing, but it's more also new application layer protocols, right? Like DNS over TLS or DNS over QUIC, that kind of stuff. I think there's a lot of potential there. I know that, for example, some others have been trying to use this for BGP and that kind of stuff.
Ian, go ahead.
Thanks. I really support this work. I think it's awesome. I think having it for HQ would actually be really amazing, unless we're just going to deprecate HQ, in which case I guess that's not a problem. But I don't think we've decided to do that. So anyway, but yeah, I really support keylog, and I think extending it to more transports, whether it's like DNS or HQ or whatever, would be like hugely helpful. And I would actually like to see a lot more congestion control, like transport information in there. And I can hopefully in the future work with you on that now that we have like BBR2 almost done.
Jana.
Thank you for this. Thank you for this work, Robin, that you've been doing on this for all this while. QLog is quickly becoming a de facto standard. And I think that it's, given the number of implementations that are supporting it and plan to continue supporting it, it makes a lot of sense for us to include it in a part of the working group, of the QUIC working group. We need to have tooling, and this is one of the ways that we've managed to get some seriously good tooling, and that's important. Now, that said, I want to draw a line between the QLAG format and the tooling that goes with it. Like QViz is the thing that people love. QLog is the thing that people manage to somehow read and somehow follow. So those are two different things, right? So I think that when you're talking about adopting something here, we're going to be adopting QLog, the format, not QViz, the tool. And to the extent that we're talking about QLog, I would like to make sure that we don't try to expand the scope of that within this working group to include TCP. I would love for TCP to have all of this. I would love for TCP to have the same sort of, multidimensional capabilities that QViz provides for QUIC and HTTP3. But in trying to solve both of those problems, we might end up casting too wide a net. I would rather see QLog be specific to QUIC, and something similar or parallel to it can evolve for TCP if there's adequate interest in TCP/M. I would love to see QLog be here and limited to QUIC. So I vote for 3, even though we are not voting.
Yeah, quickly interject, and so I've heard from people who are not on the call also that there's this distinction that Jana mentioned between QLog and Q, which is interesting, and one discussion that isn't really in scope for the working group, but is very important to have, is sort of what's the model forward for jointly developing QViz or similar tools, because there's obviously pretty strong dependency between the log format and the tools, and can't really evolve one forward without thinking about the other. So that is a discussion that goes with that. I think Matt is next in queue.
Yeah, so also echoing what everyone said, which is thank you. I can say that like from yeah.
Lucas.
Sorry, yeah, I just wanted to inject myself at the end to say, because one of the points I was hoping would come up on the slides didn't, and this isn't a criticism, but just to highlight that it's taken us about a year to get from between QLog 01 an O2, and I see that partly because a large burden's been placed on, and kind of Robin is the main driver here to factor in all the feedback that he's getting back on QLog and to try and design improvements or changes to the spec of QLog to adapt to how people are actually deploying and using this and finding out what pieces of information they want to find useful. And so by having more kind of airtime for this thing, hopefully people can contribute. We can get a bit more governance over the spec in order to help it thrive, rather than kind of get a bit stuck looking for answers from people who are, I don't know, maybe not so focused on delivering something. So there's probably a roundabout way of saying, as an individual, I would support adopting this somewhere rather than requiring it to remain an individual draft.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think it's important to realize that at the moment, right, Robin has basically been doing this by himself as part of his thesis, and because he's otherwise bored, just doing a thesis is not really enough, But if we're adopting this, right, we would really, I think, I don't want to say require, but really encourage people, especially people that are running QLog in production in some way, to like chip in and throw some effort at helping out here to develop this forward, both on writing the specification and developing it, but also possibly on the visualization tools, right, which are this other thing that everybody benefits if those tools get better, and that there should be a joint interest in making those better. I think we're going to continue this discussion on the list. What I heard was mostly leaning towards 3 and 4 on your list that I cunningly took away already on your last slide. So I think we're gonna have a discussion about whether we take this on and where. It's also a discussion we need to have with the ADs in case we gravitate towards 4 rather than 3, and even 3. Going quickly into the planning and wrap up. So we already talked about what we're planning for the base drafts, and we talked a little bit that we're gonna see that we can progress the already adopted other work items like ops and various extensions forward, and we're gonna see what else we can adopt. Multipath is another thing that we're gonna talk the rest of the 20 minutes I guess we have still left. But otherwise, I think that's what we're gonna do is we're gonna try and do a recharter of the Quick Working Group now that the base drafts are basically done, and we're currently talking to the ADs about what text we want to put into the charter. There's a question mark how much the charter should restrict us in terms of topical scope for extensions, for example, that we're going to take on. So that will happen, and you'll see draft versions of a charter, and you can comment on them, I guess, over the next few weeks sometime. Future meetings, I don't think we're planning anything before the next IETF, unless the multipath discussion seems to develop in a direction where another interim might be useful. At the moment, I don't see any other topics sort of requiring an interim of some sort. And with that, I think I want to open the floor. We have 20 minutes for the multipath, continuing of the multipath discussion, and maybe I want to first sort of. So it's been free flowing quite a bit on the working group, but there's been some sort of directions that have become a little bit clearer, right? So there's some people seem to believe that what we currently have in the base drafts is effectively support of some parts of what a full quote unquote multipath solution would offer, and therefore we already have, if you want to look at it that way, delivered on our charter promise to ship multipath. We haven't shipped multipath that's compatible in features with multipath TCP, for example, but we have some support for multiple paths, and some people have said that that's enough to address the charter item we had. There's other people that say, no, the charter item was written specifically to enable use of multiple paths concurrently, and that is not something that is maybe easily enabled by what we have. And I would like to sort of try and see if we can come to an agreement on whether some of those use cases that we've seen presented during the interim are supported by what we currently have, and if there's enough support for doing something else that would support maybe some more use cases that we've seen presented. And I've talked enough, I think. So please get into the queue. Please be brief if you can. We want to try and have this be a discussion as much as possible in this forum. Ted Hardy, you are first.
Ted Hardy, thanks very much for opening the floor for the discussion. First, I don't think the charter exegesis is really important. I know what we meant at the time, and what we meant at the time was to look at how to do concurrent path usage, but I don't think that that really has to constrain where we end up now. Things have changed a lot since the charter was originally written, and I think the design of QUIC has changed enough to move some mechanics that were inside QUIC up into the applications that a reconsideration is probably reasonable at this point. That said, my personal take is what people have described as use cases, and the ones I personally care about, don't work in QUIC now without multiple connections. And you can always have multiple connections, so you can get multipath at the application layer by using multiple connections and the failover characteristics that are there now. But I think that if you wanted to have something where you got the advantages of having it within a single transport, and I'm not going to rehearse them because I see people in line behind me like Jana who can rehearse them much better than me, you would go ahead and make them first-class versions of first-class elements of some version of QUIC. And I think one of the things that we really have to decide here isn't so much whether we want to do multipath, but whether we want the applications to do multipath using multiple connections or using QUIC. And if we are going to do multipath with QUIC, whether it's going to be a baseline version of QUIC or an extension or a version that runs parallel to the kind of current failover version that we have now. So I think my personal take is that all of those are kind of still on the table given what we've seen, but I would prefer to see concurrent multipath as a version of QUIC, possibly not the same version as the failover version of multipath. And I've talked too long. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Ted. Ian?
Yes. Lastly, I wanted to say that I would very much like to see some deployment experience. I've asked for this on the list a few times, but I think that's the most important thing at this point. I also think a new version of QUIC is sensible because we have tons of versions and it's not really a very large cost. Not really sure what else to say, but except to say that, like, reiterate the fact that, like, we've been deploying QUIC for 6 years or something, GQuic, without an IETF standard, and that's a clear indication that you can widely deploy something without an IETF standard and then come back with information to inform the working group to create a good standard. So I do not think that, like, the lack of an IETF standard blocks anyone else from, like, running multipath on their own networks.
Thank you, Ian. Spencer?
I want to just mention a couple of things. One is that I think that one of the questions I wanted to ask was, we're talking about, like, having QUIC do all the scheduling for multiple paths, or having applications do that. There's been at least a couple of people that have mentioned on the mailing list the possibility of coming up with some kind of common layer on top of QUIC that would handle multiple connections. I'm curious how many people have thought of that besides the 3 people who've said it on the mailing list, none of which were me. Second, I really want to agree with the point about doing experiments, and I really want to thank the working group for being willing to talk about multipath on this mailing list and to consider multiple experiments to see what we really need. And I am trying to do some analysis in the draft I sent to the quick mailing list -01 version today, to try and understand basically, what different people mean when they say multipath and what they're hoping to use multiple paths to do. That was everything for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Spencer. Eric Kinnear, please.
Yeah, I would be somewhat interested in seeing folks maybe write up or use one of the existing multipath extensions, / call it a new version, whatever you want to do, and actually deploy it and get some experience, to echo some of Ian's comments and others. I think that's something that we do for a lot of other protocols. I don't think you need to have the RFC to get that experience. So if we said, wow, look, and here's an actual real world end user benefit where it does this awesome stuff, like, cool, I like that. But I think we're seeing a lot of people who are very hesitant to put time and energy in. And I think that's also a completely reasonable response until we've actually been able to demonstrate some actual benefit.
Thanks, Eric. Jada, please.
Thank you. So just a few quick points. At a high level, I tend to think that multipath should be in the transport. This is something that's going to be useful in the long term. However, I want to be clear that I'm talking about where I believe multipath ought to be in the long term. As far as now is concerned, we've spent a lot of time building up connection migration and all the things that we needed to make that work well. In fact, if you had paid attention, one of the things that you might have seen is that one of the two design issues that we caught and we fixed during last call was around connection migration. So this has been a gift that has been giving repeatedly, and I completely expect that we will find more things as we go further along. So I expect that there are more dragons here than people anticipate. But this is all to say that we need more experience with the mechanisms that we already have in place in the protocol. If people want to experiment, I would recommend one strong thing, and I strongly encourage people experimenting. I don't need to, but as Ian was pointing out, people are free to go experiment on their own. But I would ask that people consider the mechanisms that are already in place. We spent a fair amount of time trying to figure that out. Simply, even if those mechanisms were to be replaced, I think it's important to consider the connection migration mechanisms that we have in place and then replace them meaningfully. Finally, I'll note that there is a distinction between what I think of as the use of multipath and the design of the protocol that accomplishes this. The fact that multipath can be used with QUIC is something that that needs experimentation, and folks who can do this and bring results to the table or bring the experiences to the working group. But the design of the protocol itself can be something that whatever you choose to use is perfectly fine. We can design protocols as a working group later and make it better. What I would want to see is how it gets used and what the value of it is in actual deployments.
Thanks, Jana. Christian, next, please.
Answer a question that it's about whether multipath shall be a new version of QUIC or whether we can use an extension. And I think that in practice, we can do a lot with extensions. We have proven that in the QUIC development so far. We have done things like datagrams. We have done things like delayed acts, which are pretty much in the same kind of complexity as multipath. And so I think that we can definitely experiment with multipath, building on the extensibility of the QUIC protocol. And so I'm pretty much in line with what Gianna and others have said there, that we don't, we can definitely have experiments going on today and clarify stuff like the discussion we had with Kazuo and others about how to fit AEAD and connection IDs and stuff like that, and do actually the bare minimal changes to QUIC to enable multipath, because we are already almost there. So that's my point. Let's experiment, and let's experiment using the extensibility of QUIC, because it's already there.
Thank you, Christian. Dimitri.
Hello, guys. I just wanted to point out that we just had a presentation about multipath use of QUIC. So why is that not valid? I mean, did you guys like it? I liked it.
Okay, thanks, Dimitri. I put myself in the queue, so I'll take my chair hat off. Literally. Basically, something kind of that riffs on what Joanna and Christian said is that, and a point I've made on the mailing list is that we're still trying to take this transport layer and map HB3 on the top as a fully formed complex application protocol that's multi-streaming and will be used in ways that exercise QUIC for its intended goal in the first place, to mitigate head-of-line blocking and some other things. Yes, QUIC can be used for lots of stuff, but this is going to be a good test of implementations and how they do things like tuning of congestion control and flow control of streaming data. So I think too much focus on using multipath to solve perceived performance problems of QUIC implementations right now risks kind of throwing bandwidth at a problem that could be solved through continued deployment experiments just with QUIC version 1 and or extensions that can be more easily designed, deployed, and tested, such as delayed ACK or other things that people have on the table that they might like to try. So that's all I wanted to say is let's be careful with applying solutions to problems that are unique and not unique and solvable by some kind of multipath solution. And then I'll get out of the queue. Eric.
I would actually agree with that a lot. I like the idea of not just throwing multipath at the problem. I think we've deployed a bunch of multipath stuff, and even there, the problem is not technical, the problem is policy, and the problem is cost. And so I think if we were to see a industry change, and I know some people have promised that that might be a thing, but I don't know if we've seen that yet. If we were to see a difference in cost structure or non-standards incentive structure, I think we might see a lot more people being way more interested in deploying multipath things. That's a lot of people have been talking about a lot of use cases that are like, well, this would be super cool if something else happened. I'm not saying we shouldn't solve the problems that we will need to solve when that day arrives, but if we're advocating that we think that's not going to be a big policy problem, I think that may be the source of some of the skittishness to dive down that path.
Thanks, Eric. Jana, please.
I completely agree with what Eric just said. I wanted to re-emphasize something that Lucas pointed out. One of the things that made MPTCP slightly easier, grant that MPTCP had its own troubles, was that it was operating under a single byte stream. So the constraints on it were pretty clear in terms of what the receiver needed to do. It needed to realign the byte stream and reorder the byte stream and deliver data back up in order. QUIC introduces several degrees of freedom. In this particular one, it introduces a degree of freedom of having multiple streams, and then there's priorities potentially. And that is a significant difference in that it It takes your scheduling problem of multiple paths, multiplies it with the scheduling problem of multiple streams on multiple paths, and now you have a much harder problem. This is not just a priority problem. This is actually a performance issue. Mark Handley did some early work on this, and I wish I could get my hands on this work to actually look at multi-streaming and multipath, and he found that it was critical to pin certain kinds of streams on certain kinds of paths to get performance benefits for HTTP. Now, the use case is not HTTP, the use case is something entirely different, and it's much more like a byte stream, then that's a different matter. But if you want to do something that's more general for QUIC, one has to consider the most basic unit of API that we talk about here, which is streams.
Thank you, Jana. Spencer next.
I think at least once every IETF meeting, I say that there's a fascinating conversation happening in the Jabber room that would be good to take note of at some point. But beyond that, the one important point that came up in Slack when it was not being relayed to the Jabber room during the virtual interim was recognizing, I think this was Matt, recognizing that one of the differences we were getting in the use cases was between people who were going to be using H3 versus not. So I think that's a thing for us to keep in mind, and that is somewhat relevant to what's going on in the Jabber room right now. I think we're also hearing people say, remove the single path restriction for connection migration. And Miria, just to mention one name, was asking, and I was too, trying to understand the difference between that and what at least some people are talking about with multipath support. I suspect that part of that difference is between people who would be using multipath over H3 versus people who wouldn't be. So I'll stop talking there. But again, thank you all for this discussion.
Thanks, Spencer. We're getting close to the top of the hour, so if people want to speak, they should definitely jump in the queue right now. But Miria, take it away.
Yeah, I just want to kind of slightly disagree with Jana. I mean, I agree that scheduling is complex. It's already complex, and it's slightly more complex if you add streams. But it's also not a problem that we need to solve completely right now. It's like congestion control, optimizing it for the best case of whatever. It's really complex because there are a lot of factors. And that's not what we're looking for. What we're looking for is some simple scheduling basic schemes that support a lot of the base use cases. To start with, and then what we're also looking for, especially in a QUIC working group, is to get the signaling into the protocol and get that specified so people can actually start experimenting with scheduling. But we don't need to experiment with the signaling. The signaling, I think, is kind of straightforward. We can discuss if we want one or multiple packet number spaces. But other than that, it's really straightforward, and having something that is agreed on in this working group would be really helpful to move experimentation forward.
Thanks, Miria. I don't see anyone else in the queue.
No, I think that was somewhat useful, I thought. So I think I actually saw enough people talking about the desire to see more experimentation for multipath, which is something that I think, so nobody has spoken against that, right? I think there's still a question mark in my mind as to what, if the working group needs to do anything here to enable that experimentation, because you can do a private version. There are several of them, and you can, experiment with multipath. That has happened, and we've seen some reports from Alibaba and others that have done that. But so that, at least in my mind, I don't see a need for the working group to do work on something that is multipath related to further enable anything here. So it's very clear that we're not going to change V1 to do anything here. Right, it will certainly need to, anything multipath related, anything that goes beyond what we have in V1 will certainly need to be in another version or in a future extension to QUIC. So if people either in the minute we have Entitled in the queue could say what the working group, what they see the working group to do, what need they see, I think that might be helpful for Lucas and me to figure out as we go into the rechartering what text we should write. There's 2 people in the queue. Be very quick. Thank you. 3 people.
So I think the example that Martin Duke set for starting the load balancing work that he was interested in the working group is kind of what I'm looking for here. That you can bring the work to the working group, have people comment on it, share their experiences, and compare the implementations among those people who are heading down one or more of these multi-paths. Sorry. And I don't think that the support necessarily needs to be more than that at the beginning. But I'll point out that in his case, he came to the point where he said, look, there's this thing in the transport draft that I'm going to have to relax for one of my things to work. Is that going to be okay? And the discussion then has to happen in this working group. So I think having the context in the working group and the experimental discussion in the working group along the lines that he sort of blazed as a trail there is what I'm looking for. Thanks.
Thank you. That was helpful. So basically, be a forum for discussion and a discussion of potential relaxations compared to the spec. That is what you would think is useful. Thank you, Miriam. And we're cutting after Jana.
So I think what I was trying to say earlier is that I think like we don't need experimentation on the question if we want to have like one or multiple packet number spaces or whatever. That's a design question that we can actually decide. The thing that we need experimentation on is like if and how people would use that. But that only happens if people have a reference protocol that they can refer to. And probably also some of the experimentation also only happens if people provide implementation, because not everybody who would be interested, every little application would be interested in using that will implement their own thing. And as long as we don't pick up the work in the working group, that might just not happen.
So we've seen experimentation already, and there are implementations that do one flavor of multipath. So if people want to play with multipath but don't want to implement from scratch, they can pick one of those, right?
I just don't see the value in having like multiple flavors of multipaths, because the questions which are like the design of the signaling or whatever are not depending on the experimentation part, I think.
I think they are to some degree, and maybe we disagree on this, but so I don't see the reason why we would need to do any spec work now to enable further experimentation. That really I don't understand.
So
and maybe
like,
that's something that we need to discuss
as I
on the
said,
mailing list.
Picking packet number space question, or that's really a design question that depends on a lot of other things in the base protocol. It's not an experimentation question.
I disagree, Jana.
Yeah, I'm with Lars on this one. I just 2 very quick points because we passed time anyways. First, I think that this is 100% a question of experimentation. Single and multiple design packet number spaces. Having built this with single packet number space, I can say that it is all about performance. If it's not about performance, then that design question basically doesn't matter at all. So in this particular case, I would say that people can experiment, and if people and we can't specify and expect. I don't think that just because we specify, people will show up and start experimenting. It has to be the other way. If people are experimenting, then there's a point in trying to specify something. So if we want to encourage experimentation, then we can encourage that by allowing what Ted said, basically, allow people to present their results. I'll echo what David Skinazi said on chat. If it's results and experiences, then yes. If it's a protocol proposal, then no.
Right, thank you. I'd cut the line after Jana, so we're going to keep it cut since we're over time. Thank you all. This was helpful and useful, I hope. See you on the mailing list and on the Slack. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.